things in the mail to what he later determined weren't even real addresses, and he would get responses. Sometimes the very next day, and the answers would be written in block type.
Wait a second, he's getting a letter back?
Yes.
He's
When
getting
he
a
put a
letter
question
back.
in, put the thing in the mail to an address that he had gotten.
He received the address.
Received the address through his network, and then he would mail it. But later, when things started to come apart, he would examine the addresses. They weren't real.
So it's a place out of time.
And then he'd get an answer in block type.
Reminds me of the scene in 12 Monkeys where Bruce Willis has to leave a message to the future. He goes to a specific payphone, leaves a message to some voice answering machine in the future.
Yeah.
And that's how he's able to communicate. Or in Looper, where he has to scratch letters into his arm as a young man. And of course, as an older man, they start to form as scars on his forearm.
Yeah.
So these are the ways that you can communicate through time and space. But this is I love that idea.
And here's the weirdest part. Other times, a contactee would call Keel and tell him that an entity was present in his or her house and wished to speak to Keel. He would ask questions, and the entity would whisper answers to the contactee, who would then tell Keel the answer over the phone. On some rare occasions, a strange voice would come directly onto the line and speak with him. Keel assumed that the contactee was in some kind of trance for this, and that it was just the contactee's voice being shifted, almost like a possession. Ooh, but he doesn't know.
He's the putty, the medium.
Exactly, he's the putty. Here's another shirt. I think I want to be the putty. I don't want to be the putty. That's why I'm not going to Grey Friday.
Oh, dear. Yeah. No, but I want to hear you speak in kind of weird tones.
Yeah.
I'll be sure to put that up on the Facebook page.
Right. Also, during this time, Keel's phone was ringing off the hook all hours of the day and night, with nothing but beeps and electronic sounds. His phone bill was outrageous because all this stuff was happening. He went through a whole thing with the FBI trying to find out if it was tapped. He had the phone company come. They came and took him down into the basement, showed him where the trunk line was, all this stuff. Yeah. Nothing was tapped. Wow. And he was that freaked out about it. He finally just stopped paying the bill, and it got disconnected, and it would still ring.
So that's a cheap way to get out of your phone.
Yeah, there was all this kind of stuff happening with these sounds and stuff. And then other things are happening where he's being professionally screwed with as well. Right. He had a publisher who said, I need something, you haven't sent me anything in a while, because as a writer, a freelance writer like this, you're constantly sending stuff to True Magazine or wherever. Sure. Trying to make a buck. Yeah. And this publisher asked him to send something. He got some manuscript out of his trunk, and he looked at it. It was his. He wrote it, and he was like, oh, this is a good one. I wrote this a while back. It's a fun little short story or whatever. Yeah. He ships it to the guy. He said there was what he called a deafening silence, and this is what, when a creative person says that means you've been completely rejected. He was like, I didn't hear anything. Right. So finally he calls back, and the guy's like, yeah, we can't publish that. And he's like, can you send it back to me? Yeah. Sends it back to him. It's a completely horribly written thing that he never wrote, with his name on it and everything.
Well, somebody's ghostwriting for him?
Somebody took the thing that he mailed, the manuscript he mailed, and replaced it with a really bad manuscript. And on top of that, it wasn't like he accidentally grabbed the wrong one from his trunk. It was a totally different typeface and everything. So even if he had absentmindedly grabbed the wrong manuscript from his trunk when he sent it out to be published, it still would have been something that he wrote. This didn't even have the typeface from his typewriter on it.
So his story wouldn't actually get out.
But it wasn't even about the story. It was just about undermining him professionally and messing with his mind. It wasn't even about what the story was. Right. It was just about replacing his work.
So here's the question. To what greater purpose? What's the point of that? To divert him from
gaslighting. Yeah, I think it's gaslighting. I think it's paranormal gaslighting.
Explain that.
All right, so gaslighting is a term. A lot of people will know what it means and others won't. The beauty of it is that its origin is from a movie called Gaslight. Right. Where the main character is trying to make this woman think that she is completely insane.
I think it's his wife. I've seen it in film school years ago.
Yeah, so that's gaslighting, when you're just like, I just saw you on the front porch. How'd you get out here? You can go out of your way to make someone feel like they've lost their mind. And that's what it seemed like was happening. Now, here's something really important that I want to mention now, and we're going to talk about it in part 4 more in depth. There is definitely a strong possibility that a portion of some of this stuff was Gray Barker messing with Keel.
Yeah, which is pretty messed up.
Yes, it is. And
in a way.
We're going to talk about Gray Barker more. However, that might explain even some phone calls, some weirdness, some of that stuff. But the things in terms of the omniscient type things, it's not something that Gray Barker could have done.
Yeah, there's no hacking into stuff back then.
Right. And we mentioned in part 3 the whole thing about the Pope. Contactees began mentioning the attempt of an assassination attempt on the Pope. That wasn't all. A character similar to Indrid Cold had been in touch with a contactee in a place called Mount Misery, which is on Long Island.
Boy.
When I started looking into Mount Misery, I had never heard of it. This place is a paranormal hotbed. It is easily an episode in itself. Keel had a whole thing that went on there, including a contactee who had a relationship with a man like Indrid Cold, who called himself Apple, A-P-O-L, pronounced Apple.
Yeah.
Apple was constantly messing with Keel. Keel never met him and never supposedly even spoke to him, but information would come to him from various contactees, mostly in the Mount Misery area, from Apple. And Apple was kind of gossipy and into pop culture. And so
I love that.
Yeah, so Apple apparently had expressed to Keel that he had wanted to talk about Marilyn Monroe and Robert Kennedy.
Sure.
And he advised Keel to tell RFK that he should stay away from hotels.
Well, we both know which hotel that is, don't we?
Yes.
I think we've both been there.
In June of the next year, RFK was assassinated at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. And we have both been there. It's since been torn down, but it used to be a main shooting location in Los Angeles. A lot of movies were shot there, including in Marilyn Monroe performed at the Coconut Grove, which was a club there. And then in True Lies, when he rides the horse through the hotel lobby, that was the lobby of the Ambassador.
Right.
I think it now belongs to the Los Angeles School District. I know they were going to tear it down.
No, it's now a learning arts center or something.
Yeah, there's a new structure.
It's been torn down because it's very valuable property because of its location.
Yeah, and it had secret hallways and all kinds.
I was there at a film shoot, so I got to roam the hotel. And I tell you, when you go, portions of it are lighted, of course, even down these long, dark hallways. And I totally got a massive shining vibe looking down the hallway, and it's like, should I just go peek into the rooms? And I think most of them are locked. It's pretty buttoned up. But
well, I got into the rooms, and they were empty, but there was a ton of graffiti. And you weren't supposed to walk
inside the rooms.
Yeah, so and on the floor that I was at. But my wife, it was a long time ago, and she was shooting there, and we weren't supposed to wander around, but we did.
Yeah, but did you go down to the kitchen where I
went to the kitchen and
saw
the tile?
You saw the tile?
Yeah, there was a tile in the kitchen. This is pretty amazing. And I don't know what happened to this tile when the building got torn down. I kind of can't believe that nobody took it ahead of time, but it had an X in it. Yeah. And it was supposedly the spot where RFK's head lay when he lay dying on the floor there.
There was a bullet hole in the wall as well. I think that was cut out forensically.
For the trial.
Yes, for the trial. But the X, some unknown person put an X down there where they laid him down on the floor before he was moved. And before he was attended to. And if you want to get crazy, I'll tease this a little. There was a woman wearing a polka dot dress that put her hand on the shoulder of Sirhan right before he.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do the FK episode.
Oh yeah. Hey Scott, when you want to find the best price on something you need, do you just drive to a brick and mortar store hoping they're going to have the lowest prices on the highest quality products available?
Of course not. I shop online first, and I see what the best prices are. And not only that, most physical stores don't carry all the coolest products I know are out there.
Exactly. Nowadays, no smart shopper just gets in the car first. And even if you go to an online shopping site, they're just going to carry what every other store is offering. That's why Harry's.com is changing the way everyone shops for shaving products.
Well, that just makes sense because Harry's owns their own razor blade manufacturing plant in Germany. So not only can they cut out the middleman that physical stores have to go through, which ups the price by about half, they can also keep a close eye on the quality of their products.
And with Harry's.com, we're talking about a 5-bladed razor cartridge with a new, softer flex hinge for better contouring, a lubricating strip for better glide, a trimmer blade for those hard-to-reach places, and a sleek, textured handle for more control, even when it's wet.
Not only that, Harry's has some of the best shave lotions and creams I've ever tried. I swear by their post-shave balm. And yes, even though I sport a beard, I still got to trim around it, and it's those places that are more delicate. Harry's is so confident you're going to like their post-shave balm too, they'll give you one for free as a special offer to our listeners. Just enter the promo code LEGENDS at checkout to get your free tube. And if you're still skeptical, you can get their free trial set, which includes a razor, a 5-blade cartridge, and shaving gel when you subscribe. All you have to pay is $3 for shipping.
And as a subscriber, you'll get a personal Harry's concierge who checks in on you to make sure you're stocked up and happy with everything you get. That also helps keep you from chewing up your face with that last dull blade because you keep forgetting to overpay for some new ones at the store.
So go to harrys.com. That's HARRYS.com and enter the code LEGENDS at checkout to get your free trial set plus a free post-shave balm.
Once again, that's harrys.com and use promo code LEGENDS.
Oh, man. I'm just fishing for some sympathy. But seriously, it's a huge problem solver for me and my family because although I love cooking, grocery shopping, not so much. And who wants to make time for that these days?
Yeah, that, and you also come out looking like a hero because Blue Apron makes it easy to serve up delicious restaurant-quality meals with seasonal, artisanal ingredients sourced from their community of family-run farms, fisheries, and ranchers.
And we've never eaten so well with so much variety. I mean, I have my standard favorite dishes I make, but even I get tired of those after a while. Blue Apron creates their menus weekly, and they're not repeated within a year. You can choose your meals from a variety of recipes, or let Blue Apron's team of chefs surprise you with their picks.
It also couldn't be more flexible. Customize your recipes each week based on your preferences. Then choose the delivery options that are most convenient for you. There's no weekly commitment, so you only get deliveries when you want them.
You know what else is awesome? I'm getting ready to travel for Thanksgiving, and they actually allow you to donate those meals to people in need.
Oh, that's very nice.
You can skip.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You don't go on vacation
awesome.
And you get a pile up of food at your doorstep.
Exactly.
You can choose.
You can choose. And making the meals is also fun and easy. Each meal comes with a step-by-step, easy-to-follow recipe card and pre-portioned ingredients and can generally be prepared in about 40 minutes or less. It's really sparked my love of cooking again and improved my kitchen skills, not to mention my Michelin star ranking as the family chef.
Check out this week's menu and get your first 3 meals free with free shipping by going to blueapron.com/astonishing.
You'll love how good it feels and tastes to create incredible home-cooked meals with Blue Apron, so don't wait. That's blueapron.com/astonishing.
Blue Apron, a better way to cook.
Hi, I'm Chris, host of Return to Camp Blood, and you're listening to Astonishing Legends with Scott Philbrook and Forrest Burgess. Now, back to the show.
All right, so anyway, he had received advanced information on that. Keel was getting advanced information on other assassinations and global world-changing events. And he didn't know what to do with the information, and not only that, Keel was starting to feel burdened with how am I supposed to interpret this? Because the information's coming in, it's about these significant political figures. He even claimed that he had information about Martin Luther King's assassination. And he had the nature of his death, that it would be on a balcony, where it would be, and he had the date, but the date was wrong. He said he tried to reach out to King's people. He could not get in touch with them. And I think that whatever the month was that he had, it wasn't the actual month of his assassination. So there was always something that wasn't quite right. And we mentioned in part 2, there was additionally the information that he'd received about Point Pleasant. And he had been led to believe that what he called a power plant was going to blow up and lots of people were going to die. And we read you that letter that he wrote to Mary Heyer in part 2. So that was when he became convinced that something was going to happen there. And he says power plant in the book, but I feel like the power plant was a cover-up.
TNT?
No. There was nothing at the TNT area to blow up.
Right.
I think what he was concerned about and what he was protecting, because he was concerned that it was a defense secret at the time, was the DLA, the Defense Logistics Agency, that is in Point Pleasant and still there to this day.
That's actually what I meant.
Yeah, not TNT.
No, you're right.
Yeah. So, and that is an area that theoretically could be using, moving or storing weapons grade materials.
Yes.
And I think that was what he wanted to imply, and I think that's why they made the reference to the power plant, both in the book and in the movie. There wasn't a power plant that was a problem. I think he was trying intentionally to be a little vague about it.
Yeah.
So he is getting all this information. He's also getting information about blackouts. He thinks these blackouts going to come, all the power's going to be a catastrophic blackout. And then 70s blackouts were a bigger deal.
Oh, there was a huge one.
Yeah, and they're still a big deal, but there was a lot of concern about crime at that time. So you had to really get prepped up for that kind of thing.
Yeah, there was a bad one in New York across the eastern seaboard.
Yes.
And of course, people just went looting.
Exactly. And that's what everyone was concerned about, that kind of thing would unfold. So he would be getting the information from the contactees that this blackout's coming, and that's what he was prepared for on December 15th, I should say, when the bridge collapsed.
Right.
He was prepared for a blackout, and he had, as we mentioned in part 2, a friend of his over. They had candles and flashlights, and they were just kind of waiting for when the president lit the tree, the Christmas tree. Which president was it? I keep forgetting. Johnson?
Yes.
President Johnson. And the tree lit up, and nothing happened. And he was like, oh, that's strange. And then they had the breaking news thing came on.
Right.
A bridge has collapsed on the Ohio River. We already told you that story. So the question is, why is he getting all this information? Going back to the attempt on Pope Paul, here's another example of how this played out for him. It's an excerpt from his book. Convinced that Pope Paul was about to be knifed to death at the Istanbul airport, I rented a car, loaded it with flashlights, candles, food, and bottled water, and drove out to the Mount Misery area to await the blackout, because there had been an implied blackout that was going to happen with that as well.
I don't know if I'd want to wait it out at a place called Mount Misery.
Well, he had a lot of contactees there.
Yeah.
He knew the area.
He's familiar with it. True.
So on the way, I stopped to see one of my contactees, and he informed me that a spaceman had just been to see him and had left a silly message. Quote, tell John we'll meet with him later and help him drink all that water, end quote. The contactee had no idea that I had several quarts of spring water in the trunk of the car. So then he gets closer to Mount Misery. He picks out a motel randomly. The motel clerk comes up to see his identification, which he said was really strange. He presents his driver's license. This is John Keel. The clerk says, we've got a lot of messages for you here, Mr. Keel. She pulled out a sheaf of message slips. I started to protest since I had not even known I was going to stay at that motel until minutes before. The messages were all nonsensical, meant only to prove once more that my movements were being anticipated. As we said in part 2, 3 years after this, on November 27th, 1970, there was an attempt on Pope Paul VI's life at the Manila airport. It wasn't Istanbul. The Middle Eastern portion of the information he received and the date were wrong. He knows that these things are critically important, but there are puzzle pieces that are missing. The date and the location isn't right.
Yeah.
And so it's useless to him, other than to just freak him out.
But is that the point? Or is it something like, well, it's an alternate time stream, an alternate reality that is fading in and out, that nobody can seem to really get correct? Or is it just the trickster, prankster element?
Here's the other thing about it. Mary Hyre, too, was having dreams about what was about to happen at Point Pleasant. He was actually flying back to the Point Pleasant area after checking on some UFO sightings or landings in North Carolina. And he landed at whatever airport you fly into, and Mary Hyre picked him up from the airport. And so they're riding into town. She's probably taking him to this hotel, which he always stayed at, which I think was the Blue Fountain Inn, which is now a Regency Inn, I think. I looked it up. That was John Keel's headquarters. It was in Gallipolis Ferry.
Right.
And she had picked him up from the airport. She said, just before I got your letter, I had a terrible nightmare. There were a lot of people drowning in the river, and Christmas packages were floating everywhere in the water. He said, maybe you were just picking up my thoughts somehow. She said, maybe, but I've covered a lot of drownings on that river. Never anything like this dream. There were so many people. I've been feeling uneasy ever since, and everybody else feels the same way. You can't really put your finger on it, but it's like something awful is about to happen. She also said, ever since all this flying saucer business last spring, things just haven't seemed right. We don't get many UFO reports anymore, Mary told me. And except for that thing Mrs. Thomas saw, Mothman seems to be laying low. Everything is quiet. Too quiet. Not too long after that, as we described in part 2, the Silver Bridge collapsed under a heavy load of rush hour traffic on December 15th, 1967, just as John Keel was awaiting a blackout that he thought was coming when the president lit the Christmas tree at the White House. Mary's dream came true. There were Christmas presents floating in the water. 46 people died. 2 of them were never recovered. And things were about to get quieter. So you could see how all these events that have happened, and Keel wouldn't even realize the thing about the Pope assassination attempt until 3 years later. And so it continued to get this information that he just couldn't do anything with. And what are the motivations, as they say in the movie? Well, their motivations are not human, as you quoted already in the prior episode, and that's a line from the movie, but it does seem that way in a way. Why was he singled out to be a little bit in the know about all of these pending events?
Well, there's people that I believe are more prone, targeted maybe. I was listening to an interview with David Weatherly when he talks about, he's another author, he's done books on the black-eyed kids, and I think he knew Keel and is a friend of Brad Steiger's. Everybody in this kind of field kind of eventually gets to know each other and what they're about. And he had a friend that just said, I don't like driving with you. We always see something weird.
Right.
He's there. So he's always on the lookout for strange things happening. And I believe we relayed that before, where they come around a bend and he saw a grinning man standing by the side of the road in the patch of the weeds. The friend is terrified, doesn't want to go back. Finally, he convinces them, and they go back. And of course, he's not there, but they can see where this person was standing. This very tall, garish-looking harlequin with an impossible smile. Like Keel, he's tuned into this, which is maybe why people like this get into this field. Brad Steiger said the same thing. He was born and raised in a very old building, which was a stagecoach stop, and he said it was completely haunted. Yeah. So much so, as a little child, these old ghosts would talk to him, which I find frightening, because usually people see ghosts and they kind of wisp away, they're doing their thing or whatever they did in life.
I see stagecoach people.
He saw stagecoach people. It reminds me, it was at 1408, that was a terrifying aspect of that, where John Cusack is staying in the room as a bat, and he starts seeing these apparitions, and then they kind of turn to look directly at him, which that part's not supposed to happen. They're not really supposed to interact directly with you.
The stagecoach stop, ley lines, roads, intersections, Hendrick Cold, Chief Cornstalk, the fort, everything, all happening at intersections of travel.
Why does that happen? Why do we pick the roads we do? Well, that's where it's like water passing for finding the least resistance. You don't cut a hole directly into a mountain unless you have to. You find a road that naturally lays out. So, like he was saying, though, he was prone to the supernatural. Brad Steiger was, even as a small child. So there are certain people, I believe, that are really in tune with this stuff. We're not, for better or worse, but we're interested in it. So could be kind of a curse. Like you said, it's a burden.
Keel says himself, though, that he's the poor schlub with the wrong aura, and that's why he's not getting the right information.
Say that again, please.
Somewhere in the book, he said there are other people that are getting everything right, or they're more in tune.
Yes, more things right.
And that he's the schlub that's like thinks the power plant's going to blow up when in fact the bridge is going to collapse.
Yeah, that's
like he's a little out of whack. Right. That's what he seemed to think of himself.
Well, that's really hard to say, because I'm sure he's totally frustrated because people's lives are at stake and he is unable to do anything about it. And so that must be tremendously frustrating. But what's the purpose here? From the other side, wherever this information is coming from, is to say like, hey, this is going to happen. Look out. Well, we can't really get it totally accurate. So something's going to happen. Just be prepared.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah, good luck. Here's a bit of information, and sorry that's confusing and frustrating, but that's the best that you're going to be able to receive.
And there's an underlying theme with the whole process, with the whole book, and with everything that happened as he documented it, with every encounter in the small picture and then in the bigger picture, and even when he starts getting all this information about these events. And the theme is they don't seem to know exactly when anything is going to happen or what time it is right now.
Yeah.
There's something about that. For me, when I look at this book and these stories on an instinctual level, and not just Keel's book, but all the other things that we've looked at, there's something about the fact that they don't seem to know when it is.
Right. Maybe because everything's already happened all at once, and one long continuous now. There's no past, there is no future. It's just now. I know that's a really hard concept to wrap.
No, and that was Einstein had that theory, I believe, that everything was happening at once. There's many people in the research corps that are a lot smarter and better educated than I am. But while you look that up, I do want to say that we're about to wrap the show up. But before we do, we wanted to talk a little bit about the actual mechanical failure of the bridge and how that worked.
From brainyquote.com, the only reason for time is so that everything doesn't happen at once. And it's attributed to our great Mr. Einstein. So, however,
that implies that time is a problem, and some guy was like, hey, let's put time in there to fix this.
Okay, so cursorily looking this up here, and this was in the skeptics.stackexchange.com question. People say, hey, did Einstein really say that? Well, the one answer here that gets a lot of votes, the oldest confirmed use of any version of this quote that I was able to find is from Ray Cummings' short story, The Time Professor, published in January 8th, 1921, issue of Argosy All Story Weekly. And the quote here from the character is, I do know what time is, Tubby declared. He paused. Time, he added slowly. Time is what keeps everything from happening at once. I know that. I seen it in print, too. And then he used it again, Ray Cummings did, in his novel, The Girl in the Golden Atom, published in 1922. So he says it twice there, and then, of course, the entry goes on to say, this quote has been mistakenly attributed to Albert Einstein, Richard Feynman, Woody Allen, John Archibald Wheeler, and likely others in many different forms. So there you go, you can chew on that. But the principle is the same. Time is a perspective for us humans, so our heads don't explode. You do age. There are things about our physical world that you have to contend with. You kick a rock, you hurt your toe, as can be witnessed in the movie What the Bleep Do We Know? So there are things that you have to deal with, but you often realize that the rock you're kicking, as well as your toe, are mostly made up of empty space due to the massive atoms and subatomic particles being very low. So most of it is empty space. So otherwise, how do you deal with everything happening at once? And that's the other big question. If everything happens and there is no past, there is no future, there is only now, which I think is also a Buddhist philosophy that has everything that's ever even possible happened and has already happened. Has happened, is happening, will happen in the future. So, but all it's together. So,
sound a little bit like Donald Rumsfeld there.
There's no, we don't know. You know what? That's the thing about that saying is that we say it at work sometimes. It's like we don't know what we don't know, and that's a valid point.
Yeah.
There's things I don't know about, but I know of them. I know it's coming up. I should study that. I don't know about that.
Right. Like our next episode.
Yeah, exactly. But we don't even know what that is. So there are things that we don't know.
Yeah.
We know we don't know. So
all right, let's talk about the bridge. It's time to.
Here's the culmination of this entire string of events. Unfortunately, a tragedy. That we're saying people had a feeling that something bad now for a whole 13 months. People at this town and John Keel, not exclusively, have felt that something bad is going to happen.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned the number 13 because there's sort of an odd numerical thing going on with the bridge collapse. It doesn't necessarily mean anything, but Marie Mayhew, who is one of our illustrious members at the Astonishing Research Corps, dug up the actual traffic report from the collapse of the bridge. A lot of pages are missing from it. It's scanned. It's online. It's odd that there's pages missing. I don't believe it's a conspiratorial thing. I think it's just kind of that classic sort of Somerton Man thing, old files, pages disappear or whatever. So,
not redacted.
Not redacted. So what I want to do here is I'm going to read a little bit from the conclusion section of the report. Conclusions. It is concluded that at about 5 p.m. on December 15th, 1967, the US 35 highway bridge between Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and Conaga, Ohio, suddenly collapsed, with the three suspended portions falling into the Ohio River and on the Ohio shore within a period of 1 minute. Of the 64 persons in the 31 vehicles that fell with the bridge, 44 died and 2 are still missing. 9 persons were injured. All of the 24 vehicles that fell into the water were recovered. There was no evidence of sabotage of the bridge or of any vehicle. The bridge did not fail because of aerodynamic instability. The bridge was not overloaded by vehicle weight at the time of collapse based upon the designed vehicle loading. The collapse was sudden. It was preceded by several cracking sounds in the Ohio side span superstructure near the Ohio Tower. The collapse began in the Ohio side span, with this span falling first, with the downstream truss twisting upstream and falling on top of the upstream truss, trapping vehicles. That's on page 59. Page 60 is missing. That was item 8 in the conclusions category. Page 61 is present, though, and it starts with item number 13, which explains really what happened. So just want to remind you to pay attention to your 3s here. Coggs says we're crazy for attributing any value to all these numbers, but this is...
Why is he even listening to all this? Why is he even here? He can't help himself. It fascinates him.
No,
he has us as well.
He loves it.
And we love him.
Yes, we're glad to have him, but he is our skeptic on board, as I've said before. But in terms of the numbers here, just listen to these numbers. Paragraph 13 of the conclusions of the collapse of the Silver Bridge. Joint C13 of the North Ohio side span I-bar chain came apart during the collapse, with I-bar 330 fracturing completely across its eye at joint C13. I-bar 33 separated from the pin at joint C13 either before or after I-bar 330 fractured. The sequence of failure of joint C13N will be determined after completion of laboratory tests, further investigation, and analysis of all facts developed during the investigation. All right, I can go on. It's pretty dry civil engineering type stuff. I'm pretty familiar with what happened to the bridge, so I just want to talk about it a little bit.
Just put it in layman's terms so we can understand.
I will. And by the way, we have a link to...
No pun intended.
Yes, a link to a couple of videos that explain there was a big reconstruction. They built models. There's another university called Open University. I found the link today. That's in our links that actually has a 3D rendering of how the bridge fell from the perspective of being in the car, which is pretty fascinating.
Well, you had mentioned something interesting about it wasn't associated with aerodynamic instability, which means high winds passing through. Now, that reminded me of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, which collapsed, but there's actually footage of that, and that was early. That was early 30s.
Yeah, we should share that. I can't remember when that happened, but you do see the bridge had a vibration.
Twisting. There are cars on it. There are people. Fortunately, there's only a few people that are running for their lives. And I don't even know how you would stand up when there's a confluence of winds. And again, like that sine wave we said, when you're peaking at a maximum apex there, that crazy things can happen.
Yeah,
not with this case.
No, and here's what went wrong with this bridge. It was, as many articles have pointed out, designed to fail, and there's a reason for that. It used for its suspension, the way a suspension bridge works is that the cables that go to the towers and back to anchors on the land support the road deck below.
You're holding it up. That's what you're suspending.
Yes, you're suspending it. And there's flexibility, which is good because bridges need it for wind and for the loads that come across. Now, the bridge was built, I believe, in 1928. Yes. And when it was designed, the Model T or whatever weighed about 1,500 pounds, and trucks at most were 20,000 pounds, I think.
Well, that wasn't a new design either. That design, the I-bar design, had been around for 100 years about.
Yeah, it had been around, and they reinforced the deck over the years because some people said, oh, there were too many cars, there were modern cars on it. It was actually supposed to last from 1928 till 2028. So,
there you go.
It was supposed to be a 100-year bridge. Now, the easiest way to explain I-bar construction is because I didn't really understand what that meant until I started really digging in on this. But essentially, when you look at a suspension bridge, usually it has cables, like the Golden Gate Bridge has this big cable, and that cable is made up of like 1,000 little cables all intertwined and wrapped around each other for strength and redundancy.
Now, think about this. You might logically think if you had say a 5 or 6 inch diameter solid piece of core steel in a rod, and you think, well, that's solid steel. That's really heavy. It's really strong. Well, actually, a cable that is 5 or 6 inches in diameter, made up of thousands of little strands, is much more strong.
Exactly, and much more reliable. And it has, again, this is an important word, redundancy.
Exactly, because even if a few of those strands break, the strength of the remaining ones will hold together.
Exactly.
And that's what we say about redundancy. Now, I wanted to say, when you talk about I-bar, kind of picture a needle with eyelets on both ends.
Well, you know the thing that I thought about when I was like, what is this I-bar? And I thought, oh, that's not very long, whatever. On this bridge, they were 30 feet, I believe, long.
Yeah.
And they look exactly like that little thing on your bicycle chain. So when you look at a bike chain, that's what the suspension was. It's essentially a giant bike chain. The thing is, even a bike chain has a couple of those stacked up together in some cases.
Exactly, yes.
This bridge did not have enough duplicated I-bars to keep it strong. I think it only had 2, maybe 1 or 2. So what happened is,
per span, I think. But
when you look at the bicycle chain and you see where a link of it connects to the next link, there's a little pin that holds them all together. If you scale this up, that's exactly how that bridge was built. What happened was I-bar 330 had apparently been treated incorrectly when the steel was forged.
When it was manufactured, right.
And so it already had some fatigue built into it. And then over the years, the bridge had seen a lot of traffic, and the weight went up. They added weight to the road deck, and supposedly they beefed things up. They did not necessarily beef up the suspension mechanism, though, because it was considered to be super strong and well within its range.
Yeah. And nor did they maintain it properly over the years. That's another huge factor.
Right. They inspected it, but the problem was, what happened was at the end of I-bar 330, there had been about a 3-millimeter crack in the bottom of it that they couldn't see. It was sandwiched in, and when they inspected, it was not something that they could see, and they didn't really know what they were looking for. And this crack, over time, due to friction and vibration, because the towers were actually designed to vibrate and give.
They were called rocker towers.
Exactly. They were supposed to have a little play to help the bridge survive, because in engineering, when something is stiff, it breaks, and when it gives, it lasts a lot longer. It's actually stronger if it can give a little bit.
That would be opposed to a suspension chain that's lubricated in some way or over a tipping saddle so that the cable is able to go over the top of the tower.
Right.
In this instance, the towers are actually meant to bend,
sway.
Sway just a little bit.
Right, like a high-rise does. If you ever go up in a really tall building like the Sears Tower or whatever,
oh yeah,
you actually feel it swaying back and forth. They want it to do that because if it doesn't, the alternative is breaking in half.
You must bend like a reed in the wind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this I-bar had a little crack in it, and eventually it suffered. All these cars were stuck. A lot of cars were stuck on the bridge that night, and it just took it over the edge. What happened was the I-bar cracked, and when it did, it broke off of the pin, and the pin became askew with the other I-bars that were still on it. When it did that, the I-bar on the other side, which didn't have a failure, but now the whole joint is crooked.
Yeah.
It has all this added stress on it because they've lost one of the I-bars.
And there's vibration of cars going over.
There's vibration. The whole thing just disassembles.
And it's kind of like a domino effect.
It's exactly what it is because it's the weakest link in the chain. And because there wasn't a lot of redundancy in the construction of the suspension mechanism, that failure was a fatal event. It was a non-survivable scenario for the bridge.
Yeah, because usually when they'll do an I-bar construction, I think there's 4 to 6 I-bars in tandem there in parallel, so that's what we talk about redundancy. If one fails, you have a lot more backing that up.
Right, you hear a noise, you clear the bridge, you inspect it and repair it.
Yeah.
That was not the case here.
That was the thing, though, also with this 2.5 millimeter fissure, this crack, which is from fretting wear, so implemented at the time of manufacture. And so buried down deep in there, you can't really inspect for that. There was no way for them to do it at that time.
In addition to that, it was near freezing temperatures that night, and the metal was exposed to a type of fatigue that made it more brittle because of the cold temperatures.
Because of the cold, and that's another horrible thing I thought of people going into the water. That water was freezing cold, and the sun was setting.
Yeah.
What time was that? Do you remember exactly? It was a little after 5 p.m.
The collapse was, right around 5 p.m.
Yeah, I imagine that. And then you have this horrible tragedy, and first responders are trying to get there, and it's going dark.
Yeah, it was obviously a horrible scenario. And it's interesting to think about, there's a 3D rendering, and you'll see the link in the show notes that shows from the perspective of someone approaching the bridge from the West Virginia side, exactly how it went down. Because once that I-bar snapped, which I-bar 330 was on the northern side of the Ohio side of the bridge, that rocker tower bowed forward, and it dropped. There were 3 pieces of suspended roadway. The first one went down, and when it did, it's taking all the other I-bars with it, and it came down and took down the middle roadway next, and then the one on the West Virginia side of the bridge. And the perspective of the one woman who's in the one video, she was an eyewitness. She was on that.
She was on the bridge, yeah.
She was on the bridge, but she had
close to the edge.
Yeah, she hadn't gone to the piece of roadway that collapsed.
We have that link of that documentary that was produced. I think we talked about this before, mainly in support of the film in 2002, but she was on that bridge in a vehicle, and I think she was able to back up enough that her car did not go in, but she described it as she thought maybe a boat had hit one of the central towers. It shook so hard and so quickly, like a bang. And then, as witnesses described, within a minute, this whole thing just started to unravel, literally. It came down, and in the video, there's also a gentleman who just over, like he said, if he was a car length behind, he wouldn't have gone in. He did go in, but of course, he was able to get out.
It's a sad story. And
people, they were going Christmas shopping. They would normally go across the bridge to Gallipolis to go Christmas shopping and back and forth.
Yeah.
And as the workday was ending, they were coming back home.
And that goes right back to Mary's dream, that she had a precognition,
presence in the water,
of the presence floating in the water, which they addressed in the movie. And again, another element in the movie that I thought was made up for drama was true. And it's just a sad story. And what we're going to do is we're going to close out this episode, but when we come back for part 4, we're going to talk a lot more about the theories, a few more of the incidents, but mostly about our theories about what happened in the area.
That's going to wrap it up for tonight. Join us in 1 week for our final part on the Mothman series, part 4, where we'll discuss the theories behind the events that took place in Point Pleasant.
We'll probably both be off the chain for that one. We'd like to thank the Great Courses Plus, Squarespace, Harrys.com, and Blue Apron for sponsoring us. Please remember that supporting our sponsors helps support the show.
Hi, I'm Adam McCutcheon.
I'm Jess Corbin.
Hi, I'm Chris Saunders, and I give
Permission to
Astonishing Legends to use my voice for
Lazy Fits
galaxy-wide in perpetuity.
Our show is edited by Sarah Voorhees, and the theme is by Judson Crane.
Sound design is by Ryan McCullough.
Special thanks to the ARC and its lead researcher, Tess Feifel.
But most importantly, we want to thank our listeners. You can find us online at astonishinglegends.com, as well as Facebook, Patreon, Twitter, Tumblr, Google+, and Instagram.
Copyright Scott Philbrook
And Forrest Burgess. Good night.
Excellence in stuffing.
Have you ever wanted to give back to your community, make a difference, help the next generation? You can have all of this and make a great paycheck too. EduStaff is hiring substitute teachers and paraprofessionals in your local school districts. Apply to be an EduStaff substitute at edustaff.org.
EduStaff. Excellence in stuffing.
Spin your passion into a business with Shopify and break sales records with the world's best converting checkout. Let's hear that one more time. The world's best converting checkout. Shopify's legendary checkout makes it easier for customers to shop on your website, across social media, and everywhere in between. Now that's music to your ears. Any way you spin it, you can be a smash hit with Shopify. Start your $1 a month trial today at shopify.com/records.
With LinkedIn Jobs, we tap into a network of more than 1 billion professionals to help you find quality professionals quickly and easily for any role you need. Marketing wizards? Found them.
Software engineers?
Found. That project manager I could never seem to hire? And found. LinkedIn Jobs quickly matches your roles with candidates with the right skills and experience. In fact, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Post your first job for free and get started at linkedin.com/spoken. That's linkedin.com/spoken. Terms and conditions apply. This episode is brought to you by Paramount Plus. Get in, loser! Mean Girls is now streaming on Paramount Plus. Join Katie Heron as she meets the plastics and Tina Fey's new twist on the modern classic. Get ready for more of the rumors, backstabbing, and jokes you loved from the original movie with some fetch surprises. Rated PG-13. Wear pink and head to ParamountPlus.com to try it free.
Astonishing Legends is supported by Harrys.com, Squarespace, The Great Courses Plus, and Movement Watches.
And we're back. In a brief bit of news, we are currently retooling our website, so excuse the limitations of functionality on our existing one. It may be the first of the year before our new one is up, which will include a new store, and shortly after that, some exciting new options for merchandise. That's right, we're completely shooting ourselves in the foot with regard to holiday shopping, but for us, it's more important that things be right than rushed.
In an odd twist of events, the Theories episode was running a little too long, so we've decided to break it into 2 parts. We'll release the second part as a bonus show, commercial-free, in a few days whenever we can get it finished, so that when your family starts discussing politics at the dinner table over the Thanksgiving holiday, for those of you in the States, you can just plug in your headphones and have some Mothman with your turkey and dressing. Forrest, where do you go this time of year to see your family?
I just get out my compass and I start walking north.
Useful.
Yeah. Fear not, however, there will still be 3 more shows before we break for the year after the Mothman series is concluded, and they should be good. What are we doing again for them, Scott?
I thought you were, is that me? Yeah. I thought you were figuring that out.
Okay.
Welcome back to Astonishing Legends. I'm Scott Philbrook, and this is Forrest Burgess.
I have adopted the concept of ultra-terrestrials, beings and forces which coexist with us but are on another time frame. That is, they operate outside the limits of our space-time continuum, yet have the ability to cross over into our reality. This other world is not a place, however, as Mars or Andromeda are places, but it is a state of energy. John A. Keel, The Mothman Prophecies.
Join us tonight for the first half of our final episode on the Mothman. All right, so I think it's time for us to recap last week's episode for us because there's a lot to keep track of here, right?
Well, there's a lot of crazy stories to keep a lid on.
I think we safely went deeper than most people go on the Mothman, and we're not done yet.
You know what? It's a lot more stories we talked about and covered that you're not going to get in an average article, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
If you want to go beyond that, and even if you read like 10 articles, you're going to get most of the same story.
Yeah.
You have to read the books.
Yeah, that's what we do. We read the books and the articles, and then we got the research core too, and it's a lot of information that comes together.
You have to really pull from different sources and actually entirely different materials to get this documentaries, clips on YouTube, not only books by great authors who've made a lifetime studying this stuff, but
And also books by authors named Gray Barker.
that's right.
Well, you said great authors. I was thinking. I'm sorry.
Oh, I said great
Didn't
authors.
really work.
No,
Yeah,
right.
it didn't work.
Yeah.
Sorry, folks. All right, so let's recap. Last week we talked about the mom who saw the disco UFO wizard over the playground. My favorite new band name.
Disco Wizard?
Yeah, I think Disco Wizard or Disco UFO Wizard or
That's not
whatever.
bad.
Yeah.
Well, of course, it all reminded me of The Man Who Fell from Earth, Ziggy Stardust,
Yes.
that whole thing. And it's around the same time period.
Yes,
early
it
70s.
is. Yeah, so she saw this thing floating over the playground at her kid's school when she was waiting to pick them up. We also talked about, especially in relation to that story, the idea that maybe these sightings are so strange because whatever is happening or whatever is appearing is actually influenced by the witness's own mind.
Yeah, absolutely. You see what you are either able to see or can handle.
We also went with John Keel as he took 9 people out to the TNT area of Point Pleasant in search of the Mothman, where eyewitness Connie Carpenter saw 2 glowing red eyes in the back of the abandoned factory just as they were leaving. Had seen nothing in there. The rest of the group then saw something running behind the building into the woods after hearing a large metal object fall from the structure with a loud bang. Keel himself did not hear that from inside the building. To add to all of this, Mary Millette was bleeding from her ear at this point. Needless to say, they left the TNT area. Keel, however, returned alone and encountered a strange, what he called, zone of fear that he bravely experimented with, determining that it was a highly localized area that made him petrified when he stood within it or passed through it, even in his car. He was otherwise unable to figure out what it was. He speculated that it might be what he called ultrasonic sound, which he thought might reproduce a feeling of terror, and we discussed the idea of what is now referred to as infrasound as being a possible cause of that. And in fact, we went back to the Dyatlov Pass episode to discuss that a little bit because that was the conclusion that Donnie Icar had reached at the end of his book, although seemingly a little half-heartedly about what might have caused the kids to run out of the tent into the night.
Well, it is a proven phenomenon.
Yes.
With ultra low, below 19 hertz sound, that
Yes.
in some people it will produce feelings of uneasiness, unrest, trepidation, all-out terror. I don't know how to go that far.
Finally, we demonstrated how Keel started to receive bizarre messages from his network of contactees that seemed designed to demonstrate omniscience to him, as well as to portend disastrous future events, only to find that just enough facts about what he was hearing would be wrong, and therefore make it impossible for him to actually warn anyone about anything. All of these events seemingly culminated in the collapse of the Silver Bridge, brought about by the failure of I-bar 330 at joint C13 at 5 p.m. on December 15th, 1967, taking 46 lives. So this is the theories episode. These are sometimes our favorite to do because they're not bound by much more than our observations combined with the astonishing research corps' perspective on things and all the combined knowledge that we've accumulated in the preparation of the show. So it's a lot more fun. This is how we're going to break this one down. We took a look at a lot of topics we want to discuss regarding the events in the region, and we came up with a little more than a dozen concepts that we want to share with you guys. So we're going to take these on one at a time until we get through all of them, if that sounds okay to you guys. I can't hear you, but I'm assuming that you're saying yes. Either that or you've already pressed stop on your podcast player. Okay, Forrest, I think we should probably start out. It was hard to figure out what order to discuss this stuff in, but I wanted to go back in history and take a look at the legend and the myth of the Thunderbird, the idea behind that and how that plays into Native American culture. And also, one of my favorite things is the Garuda, which is really cool because when I tweeted that picture of the 1975 first edition copy of the Mothman Prophecies that Astonishing Legends now owns, it says right on the cover, this was 75, under the Mothman Prophecies, it says, an investigation into the mysterious American visits of the infamous feathery Garuda. Well, and I was like, what is a Garuda?
Yeah.
I had to look it up, and so did the ARC, and they dug it up for us. And this is from Wikipedia. A large mythical bird-like creature or humanoid bird that appears in both Hindu and Buddhist mythology. Garuda is the Mount Vahana of the Lord Vishnu. Garuda is the Hindu name for the constellation Aquila. The Brahmini, kite, and phoenix are considered to be the contemporary representations of Garuda. You have to see this Wikipedia page. We have the link in our show notes. It's very cool, but it does not look like the Mothman at all. But I think that what Keel was trying to do when he wrote the book was connect it to some kind of lore that made sense to people in a way.
There's two aspects of this. One, it's not a new phenomenon, even from the 70s onward. This is a very ancient concept. Now, we talked about the griffin, the Garuda kind of fit in with the hybrid animal or even hybrid humanoid type animals, especially a bird, something with wings. Wings are very central to this whole idea. But with the Garuda, which is kind of strange, is that it's Lord Vishnu's mount, but it's kind of a dude. It's
right.
Representational, but it's a man, a winged man, sometimes with a white face, but he's a golden god himself, or just a very mythical spiritual beast that has a very specific purpose, but huge. It's said to have blocked out the sun.
Right.
And passed over. So since the beginning of time and human beings and storytelling, it's a very iconic image, very much part of everybody's spiritual folklore.
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because the next place that I want to go after mentioning the Garuda at the very least is the legend of the Thunderbird, which is really something I want to thank ARC member Marissa Ball for digging up some really good information on the Thunderbird, and including this. According to the mythology of many Native American tribes, the Thunderbird was a huge bird of prey that soared through the skies on enormous wings, bringing thunder and rainstorms to the lands below. It was once assumed that this creature was completely imaginary, but cryptozoologists are no longer quite so sure. This information is pretty fascinating because there's a lot in common here, and the legend of the Thunderbird is pervasive throughout Native American cultures for generations.
One thing about the Thunderbird I remember is that with Native American cultures, it was a time to get everybody protected. The braves would gather the women together and shelter them, and the children, because it was bound to pick something off. Right, and carry it away. So that's also another aspect of this. There's great respect, but there's also great fear and caution when these things appear. So it's also a warning, and it's a foreboding kind of sign that something's about to happen, or you better protect yourself.
Right, and supposedly the thunder sound comes from the wings flapping. That's what they say.
Right, I've heard
that. Thunderbird. But there's been cases more recently where these things have turned up all over the world in recent history and going way back. There's actually one story of a man named Clyde Smith who, on April 10th of 1948, along with his wife and someone else, a man named Les Bacon, were in Overland, Illinois, when they saw a large object flying over them. It was so big, they thought it was an airplane until it flapped its wings. That was another sighting of a huge, huge bird that 4 people saw, and it freaked them out. And there's another tale that comes to us from 1940 when naturalist Robert Lyman was in the Black Forest region of Pennsylvania, and he saw something down on the ground with its wings spanning the entire width of a road. When he got up to it, it of course flew away, but when he got up to it, he measured how wide the road was, and he said that it was 20 feet across. That's more than twice the wingspan of the Andean condor, and I've seen actually the California condor at the zoo here in Santa Barbara. They're huge, they're amazing. I took my son up there on the train. These are sightings that maybe have lent ideas to the Native American idea of these thunderbirds. Maybe they're giant condors, and maybe they're just birds of prey, and maybe that's a misunderstanding. But there's more to it than all of that. And one of the things that Marissa had dug up in the ARC too was these artifacts that came from a place known as the Smith site in New Hampshire, which was excavated, I think, in the late 1960s, about the same time, oddly. In fact, it might have even been 1967. And it was an Algonquin site where they found lots of artifacts. But one of the things they found, and we have a picture of it in the links and in the show notes, is a pendant that is a Thunderbird. And it is the one that, when you see it, if you've been interested in the Mothman at all, you've seen this before. It's a very interesting sort of almost X-shaped man-like creature. And it has 2 holes, which the archaeologists say is for suspending it on a chain, on a necklace.
Right.
But the holes are exactly where the eyes should be on any of the modern depictions of the Mothman. So there's a question there for me. Was that so it could be a necklace, or was that a representation of
Yes.
what it actually looked like.
Well, the scientist aspect and those that are skeptical will say, of course, it was just to look through a necklace. But we're always trying to second guess what ancient peoples meant by their art and their petroglyphs and their hieroglyphics. But these things existed. Now, the one that you often see, this is a whole other branch here, is kind of medieval drawings of people that had faces in their chest.
Yes.
And no heads, which
Right.
that always reminds me of what the Mothman looks like.
Yeah.
The headless creature, but with a, which seems really impractical, especially if you're carrying a large bundle of logs or something, it's smashing against your face.
Yeah.
You'd mentioned this maybe in part one, the Argentavis, the giant prehistoric bird, which they can estimate the wingspan size at up to 23 feet.
Oh, this is the one in the picture with the doctor at the Museum of Natural History, I think, or some museum.
Yeah, I think that's
that bird. Yeah, it's
one you
amazing.
looked at
I mean, it looks like a crow, but it's, as I said in the earlier episode, it's the size of a bus.
Well, yeah, and it's possibly as large as between 5 and 6.5 feet tall, they estimate. So
Yeah, but it looks like a bird. It has a head and
yeah,
a neck.
it is right. It is very.
The Mothman
much,
does not have a neck. I don't know if anyone listening has ever seen the Rocky Horror Picture Show, but there's a point at which you got to say to the Mothman, and I'm going to leave out the bad word.
Yeah.
Get a neck. He has no neck.
He has no neck. But these things existed. Incredible beasts.
Yes.
Like we were talking about in the Bigfoot Ostman story episode, there was a Gigantopithecus, black eye, almost 9 feet tall or around there, and they can deduce that from the fragment of jawbone and extrapolate out what they think the size is. But that's a 9 foot tall ape.
Yeah.
Used to exist, they
Yeah.
believe. So when you think like, oh, that's impossible, and I know I was kind of bagging on the idea of a heavy man bird flapping around and being able to lift itself.
Well, that's the other thing.
Strange creatures have happened. Now,
We're going to talk cryptids in a minute.
Yeah,
but,
we'll talk cryptids.
But to your point, though, it's just to remind you and me and our listeners, the times that this thing was seen flying, it was not flapping or anything. It was defying the laws of physics.
you can toss out aerodynamics
Yeah.
and lift.
Yeah.
Because this thing seemed to like swooped up straight into the air and then took off, from one description. These things don't need to rely on air to move. So who knows how they get around wherever they're from, but here they seem to have a lot of ease and a lot of speed. Boy, every time I see a new ad from one of the big shaving razor companies, they've got some new gimmick they've come up with. Either it vibrates or it warps the space-time continuum.
I know, and those gimmicks aren't free either. You'd know that if you bought a pack of razor cartridges in the past 15 years.
Right, and you'll also probably know by now that most of those add-ons don't really matter for a close shave. All you really need are multiple sharp blades made from high-quality steel and a cartridge that pivots so it contours through your face and some kind of glide strip. Well, Harry's has all of that.
They do, and for about half the price of those big-name brands. But you can offer a blade cartridge for $2 when you control the whole supply chain. Harry's makes their super sharp blades in their own factory in Germany, which means they can sell to you direct over the internet with low prices and high quality.
Harry's gets your face baby smooth, and then their line of lotions and creams protect and soothe. And they smell great, too. When you become a subscriber, their concierge-level customer service means you'll always have all the supplies you need, based on how much you shave.
Harry's knows you might still be skeptical you can get all this for such a great price. So why not try out their free trial set, which includes a razor, a 5-blade cartridge, and shaving gel, and all you have to pay is $3 for shipping. In fact, they're so confident you're going to love their products that Harry's has a special offer just for our listeners. Enter the promo code LEGENDS at checkout to get their really popular post-shave balm for free.
That's right. Go to harrys.com. That's HARRYS.com and enter the code LEGENDS at checkout to get your free trial set, plus a free post-shave balm.
That's harrys.com and use the promo code LEGENDS.
Hi, my name is Emily Gorey, and Scott and Forrest want to thank you for partaking in tonight's episode of Astonishing Legends.
Well, listen to this story. This is something that was a collaboration between Marissa and our more recent ARC member, Terry Favre. This is pretty fascinating. She had cited an article that says the following. In the late 1800s, an Arizona newspaper called the Tombstone Epitaph is said to have published a report and photograph of an alleged dead big bird, in quotes, with its wings stretched out to reveal a wingspan of 10.8 meters, or around 35 and a half feet. If this photograph could be verified as genuine and studied, it might disclose whether the bird was really a teratorn, but it has apparently been lost, and the accompanying newspaper report cannot be traced either. However, Terry found the actual article. There is no photo in the article because I don't think they could print photos at that time in the newspaper. But I wanted to read this just for everyone to enjoy. April 26th, 1890, the Tombstone Epitaph. The main headline saying, "Found on the desert," with a subheadline, "A strange winged monster discovered and killed on the Huachuca Desert." I'm not sure I said that right, and forgive me if I didn't, and if you're laughing at me, you can send me the customary pronunciation emails that we get after every episode. All right, so I just want to read this. A winged monster resembling a huge alligator with an extremely elongated tail and an immense pair of wings was found on the desert between the Whetstone and Huachuca Mountains last Sunday by two ranchers who were returning home from the Huachucas. I'm going to say that over and over apparently. The creature was evidently greatly exhausted by a long flight, and when discovered was able to fly but a short distance at a time. The two men, who were on horseback and armed with Winchester rifles, regained sufficient courage to pursue the monster, and after an exciting chase of several miles succeeded in getting near enough to open fire with their rifles and wound it. The creature then turned on the men, but owing to its exhausted condition, they were able to keep out of its way, and after a few well-directed shots, the monster partly rolled over and remained motionless. The men cautiously approached, their horses snorting with terror, and found that the creature was dead. They then proceeded to make an examination and found that it measured about 92 feet in length, and the greatest diameter was about 50 inches. The monster had only 2 feet, these being situated a short distance in front of where its wings were joined to the body. The head, as near as they could judge, was about 8 feet long, the jaws being thickly set with strong, sharp teeth. Its eyes were as large as a dinner plate and protruded about halfway from the head. They had some difficulty in measuring the wings as they were partly folded under the body, but finally got one straightened out sufficiently to get a measurement of 78 feet, making the total length from tip to tip about 160 feet. The wings were composed of a thick and nearly transparent membrane and were devoid of feathers or hair, as was the entire body. The skin of the body was comparatively smooth and easily penetrated by a bullet. The men cut off a small portion of the tip of one wing and took it home with them. Late last night, one of them arrived in this city for supplies and to make the necessary preparations to skin the creature, when the hide will be sent east for examinations by the eminent scientists of the day. The finder returned early this morning, accompanied by several prominent men who will endeavor to bring the strange creature to this city before it is mutilated.
Anybody get a photo?
Yeah, that's the thing. As I just mentioned earlier, there is supposedly a picture of this creature somewhere, but it can't be found. So this is some digging I would have to really get over.
So they supposedly is a photo.
That's what they say. First of all, how would you haul something like this anywhere in that day and age? I mean, it would be quite a production.
That's a lot of chicken.
Yeah, and it's not going to smell good after not too long.
You gotta get it marinated quickly.
Just like the sea creature that the men found, the fishermen
the
found.
Japanese fishing trawler.
Yeah, that pulled in what they thought might have been a plesiosaur or something.
Now there is a photo of that thing.
Yeah.
There happened to be a guy, and I can't remember if he was a scientist or a journalist, just happened to be on board. But the story I remember, and it was in Omni magazine when I first saw it appear. They brought it up in a net, and this thing definitely had a neck on it.
Yes.
Very much a dinosaurish neck. And it was that, and basically the description was it just looked crusted over, it looked deep fried, and then of course now that it's out of the water, it's under its own weight. It cracks open, and I guess what issued forth was a stench so foul.
Yeah.
The captain said, "No, you know what? We got like $100,000 worth of fish on this boat. Cut this thing loose, get it off."
Yeah.
Because it was just really gross. But a guy happened to take a photo of it before they dumped it over. That's all they have, but at least they have that.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, it's true.
you never know, got a musty old piece of dinosaur in your nets.
But this thing doesn't sound at all like the Mothman, but it is huge.
I will say cryptid.
Well, yeah, cryptid, and when you look at these kind of stories and you're trying to figure out if it's a hoax or whatever, it was interesting to me the detail that, in order to measure the wings, they had to pull them out from under it.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that you've either got a very creative journalist or someone who's got an eye for a detail that makes a story feel more real.
Yeah.
But how could something that large fly?
Well,
and we talked about this before. There have been reports throughout the years, especially in remote areas, of people seeing something that looks kind of like a pterodactyl.
The leatheriness of this one.
Yeah, it sounds, and with the claws, and that had two legs in front of its wings or whatever. The pterodactyl, if its wings were folded, that's where they would be, right up near the front of the body. So, and the head 8 feet long. Was it pointed? Was it a pterodactyl head with a big horn on it?
Right.
I mean,
pterodon, but
or
yeah. Well, especially with the teeth too, because you're now having to. It's carnivorous. It's having to hold on to prey.
Yeah,
which is the purpose of teeth and to shred. So there's two things. Either this thing. It's probably more believable about these lake and sea creatures that are mythical. I don't know if you saw that brand new Nessie photo that surfaced.
No, I didn't.
Yeah. About 3-4 weeks ago. But it looks pretty good. If it's a hoax, it's pretty well done. If it's not a hoax, it's the actual photo. Looks pretty darn good because you get a little bit of the swirling action you can notice there. It's much easier to believe that something prehistoric leftover has survived in the very deep oceans because we don't know everything that's down there.
That's true.
Cthulhu could still be down there.
Very well.
So I don't know. It's really hard to pronounce. I kept reading it over and over again. And everybody says Cthulhu, so there you go.
Yeah.
But, who knows what's down there? So the idea that there could be just things living and eating and feeding off of a very deep depth down in the deep, dark oceans is more plausible, or even in Loch Ness, because it's a very deep lake, or Baikal.
Yeah.
But something in the air that flies and on land, you tend to think we've seen most everything.
Yeah.
It's really tiny. People, again, new species are being discovered all the time.
Yeah. On the other hand, species are going extinct all the time. And it's
yeah.
entirely possible that 200 years ago, someone might have been seeing the last of something bizarre that had managed to survive.
Exactly. That's my point. Maybe it's the last one. They shot it. Or something maybe has been able to survive for this long, just hidden. The other point is that it's from another place.
Let's talk about this Alaska sighting that you just mentioned. This was actually in October of 2002. There was a sighting in Anchorage, and this is an article that we're referring to on CNN.com. A bird the size of a small airplane was recently said to be seen flying over southwest Alaska, puzzling scientists. The newspaper quoted residents in the village of Togiak and Manakotak as saying the creature, like something out of the movie Jurassic Park, had a wingspan of 14 feet, or 4.6 meters, making it the size of a small airplane. At first, I thought it was one of those old-time otter planes, the paper quoted Moses Kupchiak, 43, a heavy equipment operator from Togiak, is saying. Instead of continuing toward me, it banked to the left, and that's when I noticed it wasn't a plane. Raptor specialist Phil Schimpf said the following: I'm certainly not aware of anything with a 14-foot wingspan that's been alive for the last 100,000 years. Kupchiak said the bird disappeared over the hill, and he then radioed Togiak residents to tell them to keep their children inside.
He knows.
Yeah, he's taking it seriously.
This was an issue solved, I think, with the National Geographic. Might have been even a game camp, but they had footage, or a couple of stills, of a very large golden eagle trying to carry off a fawn.
Yes.
Or just a small deer, like a juvenile deer.
Which they can do. The golden eagles can.
It wasn't live video, or it wasn't video footage, so you have just a few stills, but they're obviously in a struggle, and I think what was determined by the biologists that it's possible that a large eagle could carry off something that small game like that. Now, a full-size buck, no, I don't think so. But yeah, anything smaller, sure. And a toddler,
Well, in this story, there was apparently another local resident who was a pilot, which I think there's a high number of pilots in the Alaskan regions because that's the only way to get around.
Yeah, right.
He was a pilot, and I guess he originally was skeptical, but then he sighted this thing from about 1,000 feet away, and it wasn't just him, it was a plane full of people. They all saw it.
Right.
And his name's John Bucher, and he said the people in the plane saw him. He's huge, he's really, really big. You wouldn't want to have your children out. And that's crazy. And this is something, it's interesting to me. This is under CNN has this posted under Offbeat News.
Yeah, right.
And I have a category for this on my little news readers on my iPhone and stuff like that.
Credible reports.
Yeah, it's just like, here's the weird thing. We're going to report it, but we're not really taking it seriously. And it's like, this is a big deal. This is, 5 or 6 people right here who are all saying they saw something highly unusual. It goes in the Offbeat News section, and then the next day people just forget about it. And it's like, no, what is that? Get up there, figure it out.
Well, that's been happening a lot lately. But that is a common tag to, you have to be skeptical.
Yeah.
And one of our listeners listeners, Brown Daddy.
Yes.
Get a shout out here.
Yeah.
No, he sent me an article about an exorcism that took place. And the article was very popular, went viral from the Indiana Star, but it's the exorcisms of Latoya Amons. And this reporter, her name is Marissa Kwiatkowski, describes first approaching this subject matter, that they've been getting these incredible reports. And what's interesting here is you can see how the newspaper works, is that her editors did not want her to even approach this unless they could provide a very skeptical, at least a skeptical voice. So being neutral, but you still got to be skeptical because they're worried about their credibility. People still think that way.
Something we clearly aren't concerned with.
We've given that up. Come on, if you believe any of this,
if you believe any of this at all.
But look, we're doing it because that's the more entertaining angle. Not trying to, at least for us. Maybe some people really get off on debunking and finding something rational about it. But you realize that any media outlet has to present both sides. Of course, that's what you want. But they're going to lean towards the skepticism, and they have to be able to provide something to calm, even to allay people's fears. Like, no, this is probably not real.
Right.
But if you want, here's the crazy part of the story. Scott and I often exchange articles, of course, through emails, and it's always from the whack job news section of the newspaper or their website. It's like the news of the weird section because they can't possibly take it seriously. But you know what? Sometimes people do see strange things, and these are sober individuals who live out in the bush who know what they're looking at.
One of my favorite things about the Men in Black movie, which was based on all the authors that we're talking about tonight and have talked about in this series, Gray Barker and Bender and also Keel, was the idea that they got all their important news from the Enquirer. That's how we know where to go, where to look.
Yeah. But you know what's funny, I've been telling Scott this for the past month, is like every once in a while they get something right.
Yeah.
So, most of it's for entertainment purposes, not to be taken too seriously, but sometimes there's a nugget of truth in there.
All right, so the other thing that comes up with a lot of people, especially people who follow the Mothman story, is the idea of the Mothman having been seen at Chernobyl. Chernobyl being, which I think most people know, but it was a nuclear meltdown that took place in Russia. Our good friend, Christoph Andresen, who his podcast is called The Eastern Border, which you've heard us mention before. We've been guests on his show, and he's been guest on ours. He just did a show on Chernobyl and went very, very deep on it, and a lot of really fascinating information about how it was built and how corners were cut.
Yeah.
And shortly after that, I'm pretty sure that he was banned from entering Russia.
Who knows what that guy's up to?
That's
something interesting. He loves to dig deep for the facts, though.
Yes, and he said that the whole thing about the black bird being sighted at Chernobyl or Mothman being sighted at Chernobyl was undoubtedly a hoax.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I had heard, too, over the years. He did say that colloquially, the phrase blackbird applies to an area that has somewhere something really bad has happened, or they'll say this is a black bird for Russia. So that, goes back to the whole thing of the raven, and that gets biblical and all that, and it makes sense. But he's saying that the Mothman did not appear at Chernobyl, so we're going to go ahead and say, even though they cited, I believe they mention it at the end of the movie.
I do believe that's true,
and that's fun. That's one of those things that's fun. That's one of those things where they did make a little something up. Well, it's like all the parts that I thought were made up were true. That film.
It's not the only one, though. I think, of course, Chernobyl's a very famous disaster now, and the Silver Bridge in Point Pleasant, that was certainly very horrific. And
there was a picture,
indelible, to the minds of the people there. But you know what? I'll bet not a lot of people, even ones that saw the movie, didn't even know about it.
Yeah,
unless you're from the region.
Yeah, or alive when it happened, and you might remember it. But speaking of the Silver Bridge, there's a picture online of something on the Silver Bridge, which I haven't researched it, but to me, I'm pretty sure that's fake too. Honestly, it's like it looks like a trick photography, frankly.
Well,
it's not hard to put a blurry black object on a bridge in an old newspaper photo.
There is a mention also in the documentary Search for Mothman, which that's the one I think is produced in conjunction with the movie, that one of the locals there said, as the guy in the documentary says, there's a wino who did see a creature underneath the bridge or near one of the pillars there, the rocker towers, right before it happened, and he reported it to the sheriff. And he was not drunk at the time, but yes, he's indigent.
So people aren't taking him seriously.
They're not taking him too seriously, although the sheriff did go down and check, I believe. But he claims to have seen something, I think that day, or right around that time. So that story's relayed by one of the local people in interviewed in the documentary, not the actual person, but there were sightings all around. But is there a photo? I don't think there's any credible photo.
Well, yeah, and the only thing I know about of anyone climbing on the bridge prior to the disaster was in the Mothman prophecies. Keel mentions that somebody came in to talk to Mary Hire, I believe.
Yeah.
And Mary told Keel, I talked to one woman who lives right by the bridge, Mary continued. She says that 2 days ago she saw two men climbing on the bridge. And he said, climbing on it? She said, yes. They weren't walking across. They were climbing around the sides of it. He asked her if she was able to describe them.
Keel mentions
Get ready for this.
Yeah.
He said they were wearing checkered coats
Very
and
high
black trousers.
Yeah.
She couldn't see their faces too well because they were so far away. But she did notice their shoes. They weren't wearing boots.
She says
Just
that 2
ordinary
days ago
shoes. She thought that was odd because of the weather we've been having.
Right, but
By the way, we're back with the checkered top, checkered coat, checkered shirts, checkered the wolves, and checkered shirt. What is it with the checkered?
Oh, yeah, you did the skinwalker. Well, that's just one style option. That's a lifestyle choice, really. But
It's weird.
it is a little odd, but I think there's a very terrestrial explanation for that. Didn't we already talk about this? It's a story that was tied to Keel. Now, I thought that he had seen this. Apparently, Mary Hire had seen this. Keel's interpretation, though I do remember this part, he thought it was FBI agents.
Yeah.
The government officials, they're checking out the bridge, but this is pre-disaster. And his summation, or kind of an inkling that he got, was they knew something.
Right.
They had gotten some information. Maybe they were monitoring him because of all the strange things that
But he wasn't sure about the bridge. He
No,
thought
he was exactly.
He
but
thought it was
that's-
going to be
right.
the Defense Logistics Agency, I believe. He
Yeah.
said the power plant, but I think he probably thought it was going to be the DLA,
Yeah,
where an explosion was going to happen.
right. But I tend to believe that assessment. It was not a Men in Black or anything out of this world here. It was humans, but they were checking something out. They were looking for something. They were inspecting something. Again, that was Keel's interpretation that perhaps they had some information that something on the bridge was going to happen, and they were kind of checking it out.
You know, we're not finished with this
Yeah.
topic of global sightings, but while you're here, and since you took us here, I do want to say, you get back into that idea of these teams of players
Yeah.
that are playing a complex game of chess, and there's more than two sides, and they don't really know what the other side is doing.
It's the cigarette-smoking man. Well, I agree, because, look, this is one thing I have no proof of this, of course, but I got a really good hunch there are elements within world governments, and especially our own, that just know a lot more than we do. That's got to be the case. It doesn't have to be extraterrestrial or really crazy, but they
Well, if
have
it comes to
intelligence.
premonitions, it has to be something crazy. I mean,
Right.
if they're crawling on the bridge before it's collapse, it's imminent collapse, then they either know the future or something else in the area, like the presence of the Mothman,
Right.
is telling them that they need to be on the lookout for a disaster.
Right, well, it doesn't even have to be that crazy, because people were getting strange notes left on their door, and there's really weird grammar or incorrect grammar with some of the strange notes, like watch out, stay away, leave this alone. What if somebody sends a note, a very real paper note, to the FBI saying that the bridge is in danger, you better watch out, stay away, whatever? They're going to send people to check it out.
Right, and then they're not going to tell us about the note.
They're not going to announce that. They're not here to also cause panic. This is a main artery into Gallipolis. And again, that's the reason it was so crowded. People traveled back and forth to go shopping, and people worked on either side of the river. So at rush hour, it was packed. So if a bomb threat is called in, imagine, somebody at the FBI gets an Indrid cold call.
Yeah.
Cold call, get it?
Yeah, you got cold
Yeah,
call.
I just thought of that, sorry. If you get a call about anything, they got to check it out, or they should.
Yeah.
If it's like, bridge, Silver Bridge, whatever, how mysterious it is, where they get a funky note.
Right, like the
Saying-
stuff that was happening to Keel.
Yeah, exactly, saying the bridge is in danger, or this and that. They're going to send guys out there, and they may not be dressed as G-men with the black suits, or more like Men in Black.
Maybe they were inspectors. Maybe they were just inspectors.
Exactly. Like you said, the low-rise shoes, just regular kind of street shoes, Oxford type, is
Yeah.
not what maintenance people would be wearing, or military generally. So, unless
But
you're
you think about things
dress
that
uniform.
every perspective that we have when we look back at something like this is based on what was reported
Right.
or oral history, if it's been passed on and then written down. Things that happened and weren't written down, you'll never know about. Like, for
Yeah.
example, and I don't know, my wife and I used to spend a fair amount of time in Bucks County, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And every bridge there over the Delaware River, which is a big river as well,
Yeah.
has a tender, a person. who is in a little shack and keeps an eye on things. Now, I don't know if the Silver Bridge had that. I don't think it did.
Usually drawbridge type operations.
But these are not drawbridges. The ones I'm talking about over the Delaware, every bridge has a person who keeps an eye on things.
That's probably a state mandate.
Yeah, and it may not be the case over the Ohio River in West Virginia or Ohio, but imagine that somebody was there and they heard I-bar 330 crack.
Yeah, they heard the
like
snap.
a day earlier.
Yeah.
And just a weird little noise. Not enough to go into a cold, hard panic, because if they're looking, everything looks fine, but maybe they call the inspectors to come out and I thought I heard something weird, or even a civilian says the bridge seems super shaky. They make a phone call.
Yeah.
People come out. It could be just something that mundane.
Yeah. Again, that does not sound sinister to me or like sabotage in any way.
Right, and it wouldn't be recorded. There would be no history of that, and that's why we have to speculate on it. Who knows if anything like that happened, but if anything like that did happen, and there's an infinite variety of things like that that could have happened, we would never know.
Right.
Especially if maybe it happened to someone who died in the disaster.
Yeah.
And never told anybody.
Right. Hey, Scott, how many websites do you think we check out while doing research on a topic?
I don't know, maybe 20 to 40, depending on what it is. What I can tell you is that they're not always the cleanest and easiest to navigate. And if we want to purchase something from one of them, that can be a nightmare too.
Well, that's probably because they're not a Squarespace website. If they only knew how easy it is to set one up and how beautiful it would look once they published it. It really is an all-in-one solution for getting your work or your business up on the web.
With Squarespace, you can experience a new way to buy your domain name and choose from over 200 extensions. Then pick one of their plug-and-play templates created by the best designers in the business. Once you've got the look you want, you pick the functions you want your site to have, and then you're ready to blog, promote your physical or online business, or sell anything. Or you can just announce your special event or project.
And if you're trying to drum up business for your store or your homemade products, Squarespace gives you powerful e-commerce functionality with built-in search engine optimization, free and secure hosting, and the ability to customize your site's look and feel with just a few clicks. And everything's optimized for mobile platforms right out of the box.
And you'll never have to patch or upgrade anything yourself, ever, because Squarespace takes care of all of that for you behind the scenes. And in front of the scenes, they've got your back with 24/7 award-winning customer support.
Go poke around and see for yourself what Squarespace has to offer with a free trial. Just go to squarespace.com and start clicking around, and when you're ready to launch, use the offer code LEGENDS to save 10%.
Squarespace. Make it beautiful.
Hi, my name is Ross Woodward, and now back to Astonishing Legends with Scott Philbrook and Forrest Burgess.
Let's come back a little bit. I do want to talk about other global sightings. We discussed Chernobyl. The other story, and this is one of my favorites that we came across, is the story of the Freiburg Shrieker.
Freiburg, Germany?
Yes.
You know, I've been there.
Have you really?
Oh, yeah.
It's far southwestern Germany, right? What were you doing there?
Well, I had a friend that had been going to school there. She was finishing up, so I think we traveled down to pick up the last of her stuff. And it's the Albert Ludwig University of Freiburg in Freiburg im Breisgau, Baden-Württemberg, I believe. I don't know. That was a long time ago, but it's a very beautiful area. It's founded in 1457, and it's the 5th oldest university in Germany. So it's this grand old building, and it's the whole town is on the edge of the Black Forest. So just beautiful, gorgeous.
I love their ham.
Isn't it nice? And I wanted to buy a black chocolate forest cake, and when I did the conversion there, this is before the euro, it was outrageously expensive, like $200. I mean, they're beautiful looking, and they have cuckoo clocks, all kinds of fun stuff there. But
anyway, the Freiburg Shrieker.
My brain is frayed on all this research. Is it fried?
It's frayed. It's frayed and fried.
The point is, I've been to a very old part of the country, and of course, the Black Forest is dark and mysterious itself.
Yeah,
but gorgeous. Yeah, so
I would love to go there.
That was cool.
Well, September 10th, 1978, supposedly, if you believe any of this at all, southwestern Germany in Freiburg, as you just mentioned, 21 miners.
Not minors, you idiot.
Like children? Minors, not minors. 21 miners showed up for work, and they were approaching the mouth of the mine, the opening, and they noticed a huge man standing in front of the entrance to the mine, wearing a large, full-length trench coat.
What year was this?
1978.
Okay, not that long ago.
Yeah, September 10th, 1978. So he seems insanely large. And then they realized when the trench coat opened up, It was wings.
Oh my god. Yeah.
So, this creature opened up these huge wings, they unfolded, and it let out a shriek that the men compared to 50 men screaming or a train slamming on the brakes to avoid a disaster.
If you got the pipes, you got to use them. I mean, I'm certainly going to.
With this creature, I mean, obviously it's otherworldly. What would you think it would do after that?
Well, it depends on what part of the country you're from. Certainly, if a large man opens his trench coat, that could mean something totally different in Manhattan. If it's at the mouth of a cave and wings come out,
Yeah.
this is what I'm going to guess based on the earlier sightings connected, is that he shot up straight into the air.
That's what I would think too, but guess what?
He ran.
Nope. Wings folded up, stood there. Just stood its ground, would not leave.
Wow.
Would not leave. The miners watched it. It wouldn't go anywhere. It has freaked them out. They are traumatized. They can't figure out what to do, but they need to go to work too.
He could punch in, yeah.
Yeah, so they're trying to figure out what to do. And according to the story,
He's blocking the
blocking the
entrance.
entrance. Yeah, so they started doing busy work outside the mine at a safe distance from this thing, like cleaning up, putting things away,
We're just
hoping that this creature would go away
Yeah.
and they could go to work. After an hour, it was still there. And so now they're like doing other stuff and they're sort of looking over at it, and then they heard this huge subterranean rumbling sound.
Yeah.
Collapse and explosion. They looked over. Fire and black smoke was belching out of the mine, and the creature was
Well,
gone.
back into the gates of hell.
Wherever it went,
Yeah.
point being, as far as they were concerned, it saved their lives. They would have all died.
Aha. Now here's the button of the story. It stood its ground and kept them away. Gave them a warning signal, and just being ominous and imposing kept them away. So when you tie these in with these other stories that we've previously been talking about, and we're going to dish on it, but what's the purpose of the Mothman? What's the purpose of this guy with the trench coat? Well, what's the trench coat for, obviously?
It's not a trench coat.
He said it was a trench coat-like thing.
No, it was his wings.
Yeah, no, they thought it was. Yeah.
Oh, yes, yes.
If you take these accounts to be accurate and true, and these creatures are there and they're weird, maybe they're being misdiagnosed in a way. Well, the next question is, what's the purpose? Is it to cause these accidents, or is it to try and warn us of something? So here you go. Something sounds more like it was protecting.
Yes, well, the Freiburg Mothman accomplished his job. The Silver Bridge one, not so much.
Yeah, who knows? Well, I guess he could have stood at one end of the bridge and just kind of flapped around and freaked people out. But maybe it doesn't work that way. Who knows?
Well, here's the thing about this story. A lot of people think that it might be a hoax because they cannot find any corroborating information. There's no press reports. There's research has been done, and people can't find anything to track it down. I went to one website that said maybe it was 1878 instead of 1978, maybe the year's off or something, which would make a little more sense about the behavior and the actions and how the story's told. But either way, it's a famous sort of paranormal story.
That's a good one. You certainly, it clocks for me as one of the most amount of time staring at a cryptid.
Yeah.
I've never heard of that like an hour or two later, like, he's not leaving. So, you know, what are you doing in the meantime? Like, we'll be over here in case you want to leave. But it's a fascinating account.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, Fritz, run into town and grab a camera. You know, like you get an Instamatic in the local gift shop there. That's what I did when I was there. I actually bought film and stuff while I was there. With that amount of time, that's the only thing that's kind of wonky for me, is that you're spending a large amount of time staring at something totally trippy. I would send somebody to tell you if nobody's got a camera. Like,
well, that's why people say, you know, maybe the story doesn't ring true, but it's
right.
But
then again, you know what? It's you can never account.
It could also be in a trance. I mean, that's what happened with the Mothman. People said they went into trances. So.
Exactly. There is a psychological effect as well as a physical one. So you can't do too much Monday morning quarterbacking here on what happened. Like, well, they should have done this, or I would have done that. Why didn't they do blah, blah, blah? So
yeah,
you weren't there. If they did see something that was just a weird, you know, freaky cryptid of some kind,
right?
You don't know how you're going to react.
Yeah. So here's another story, courtesy again of our friend Christoph Andresen, who we mentioned earlier. His show, The Eastern Border, is a very entertaining podcast. He's a Latvian. He lives in Latvia.
Well, if you really want to know what it's like living there, Yeah, and the history of Russia and the Baltic states there. That's the one to go to.
Yeah, it's a great show. And he heard what we were doing on the Mothman, and he looked into the Chernobyl thing for us. And he also dug up another story that we would have frankly never known about relating to the Mothman, which I thought was, this goes in the global sightings category again. And it was centered around a TV series made in 2013.
Manimal?
No. And this series was a paranormal show, kind of like, you know, the ones that there's 5 billion of in North America right now.
Right.
And I guess the producers of the show had received reports that in the far eastern Russian district of Primorsky, which means next to the sea, near the town of Danienogorsk.
That sounded good.
Kristaps is cursing me as he's listening.
Danienogorsk?
Yes.
Yeah.
He says
it means far mountains, right?
Yes, it means far mountains. People are apparently in this small town being traumatized by a Mothman. He describes it as a very, very, very remote place, and there's not any other cities around for many, many kilometers. And there are tigers there, known as Amur tigers.
And they're huge, right?
In North America, we call them Siberian tigers.
You're right.
These are gigantic creatures, hundreds of pounds. And the people are used to living with them. And one of the things that he pointed out about these tigers is that they stay away from people. They don't want to be around people. They don't come out of the woods. They don't come after people.
Even in India, when you hear stories, it's like they're usually driven by a real lack of food or water to come venturing in.
And so apparently what's happening is in this little town, 8 people have gone missing, and a lot of animals too, with torn remains of the missing people and animals being found in the trees.
Dragging them up there.
Which sounds like a tiger. That's something a tiger might do. Locals also report that everyone has seen this creature and tried to shoot it, but unsuccessfully. So there's this whole 40-minute video, which we have a link to. We'll put it in the show notes, but it is in Russian, and we ourselves could not watch it. If we have any of our listeners that are bilingual and want to watch it, please enjoy it.
Danienogorsk.
No, thank you. You're pronouncing it well.
Well, no, I just saw your phonetic spelling here. I'm sorry, I missed that in the notes.
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay.
But Kristaps took it upon himself to translate some of the more interesting details from the video. So the areas where this Mothman is appearing and where the tigers live is gigantic, and it's filled with all sorts of animals. As we said a second ago, the Siberian tigers have no reason to walk into town. Local man in the video states, quote, "These tigers don't see humans as their competition, but they don't like them much either, so they actively avoid them. Not only them, but also anything made by humans, roads, cars, etc. So when we see them, we know that something has startled them." The video then states that the tiger is the apex predator in the taiga, the forest or the region, Taiga. These tigers are able to fight bears, and there's literally no other natural enemies that they have. At the same time, there have been only 6 unprovoked attacks on humans by these tigers throughout the entire 20th century in Russia. So that's interesting. Mm-hmm. So according to the info on this show, this mysterious creature that people have been seeing lives on the large hill of Provodnisky, which the locals call rocks sprinkled there by God. That's the translation into English. In the beginning, they talked with the local forest keeper, kind of like a park ranger, whose forest he's responsible for, which includes the mountain where they are saying this creature lives. But it turns out neither the forest keeper nor the locals go there. The mountains have always been sacred grounds to the local tribes. Here we go again. According to local legends, they have ancient burial grounds that have been guarded by the, quote, merciless guardians of the mountain, end quote, who without mercy kill all those who trespass on their land. And not only that, whenever tourists or scientists do go into the area, they often report nausea, headaches, strange sounds, and loss of sense of time. Many of them come back early from their trips, abandoning them and never wanting to return. Wow. However, during the last few years, 8 people, local hunters who've been hunting nearby the forest, have gone missing and haven't been found. This is reported both by the forest keeper and by another local hunter. The local hunter actually refuses to talk anymore about it. He's afraid what might happen, and he says the TV crew wouldn't believe him anyways. The forest keeper, whose name is Vladimir Yelichud, then agrees that the people are missing and says that lately animals too have been leaving this area, especially the local Beris population. This is what they call snow leopards. The creature is similar to a mix between a bat and a huge flying man, tall with large posture. The wingspan is reported to be 2.3 to 3 meters wide. Christophs writes, that's approximately 8.2 to 9.8 feet for those who are stuck using primitive measurements.
He's gonna get that.
He said it has sharp, large claws on its legs and wings, also on the creature's legs. One of the claws is on the opposite side